I was really committed to building our relationships with other organizations, right? I knew that we weren't big enough to be recognized as leaders in certain things, and I could see it already in what we would get funded to do. We would apply to do different things. We had the capacity to do different things, but we were definitely in a pigeonhole in some way, right? So funders didn't always recognize our capacity to serve youth, right? In general, we were doing this schools-based work. So logic would tell you if we're doing work in schools and classrooms, we're not only working with gay kids, right? Yeah. In fact, there maybe is 1 or 2 gay kids in the class. You have to assume that there's at least a couple, right? But they're probably not out to us. We were doing work with students in general, but because we were the Gay and Lesbian Latino AIDS Education Initiative, we wouldn't necessarily get funding to work with heterosexual identified young people, even though our youth program mostly saw heterosexual youth. Right? And we're talking about, sexual health, sexual orientation, but we're really talking about dating and relating, conflict resolution, normal teenage stuff that you can apply regardless of sexual orientation. And so, so I realized that, okay, we have to, develop our capacity by having strategic partnerships, right? And so a big part of the time I was there, in fact, most of the way that we grew was by having, we partnered with other organizations, right? Because we were too small, too niche to get that big CDC grant to serve gay men of color. Mm-hmm. But if we partnered with Colors and Mazzoni Center, well, we're certainly going to get it. And we might see more, African American men in this project than both of those other organizations. We might reach more, but the funder really is going to recognize our capacity to reach Latinos. Mm-hmm. Similarly, you have organizations like AGX. AGX sees a ton of white men, right? Whenever they do events, there are white men who like Asian guys, and they provide services to these guys. But I don't know that the funder recognizes their capacity to deliver services to white men. So that happens a lot with organizations that are seen as very niche. I'm really proud of TIP, which is the Trans Health Information Project. That is a program that I started along with Casey Cook, who was the executive director of Prevention Point at the time, and Ben Singer, who is a trans activist and organizer, and Marcus Iannazzi is a trans guy who wrote the first grant that we got funded. But basically it was, a couple of lesbians who were like, we see a gap. We're starting, there's no trans-specific services here. So we reached out to a couple of people we knew who were leading in trans communities, and asked them would they want to, work on creating this program. So TIP just recently in the last year became its own organization, but it was started as the first and largest multi-service transgender health program in the city. And we did that really by kind of like telling the funder that they were wrong. The funder, the health department, our city health department, saw that, trans women were at risk, and so they were under this category that included men who had sex with men. Because the health department saw them as men. These were people who were biologically born male, and their risk, as the health department saw it, was from having sex with men. We saw that there were a lot of folks who were doing street-level hormones and silicone injection, and so we argued that an injection-based transmission is much more efficient than sex. If you're injecting something right into your veins, right into your body, into your skin, it's much more efficient than unprotected sex, right, in terms of risk. And so we, we applied to, address injection risk, allowed us to see men and women for the first time. And so that's where, we have a comprehensive program. That was a partnership program, partnership with activists and another community-based organization to kind of make that happen. But, GALAEI, during this time, this is like the early 2000s. I was there until 2008. It was definitely tough. I mean, these are the Bush AIDS years. Yeah. These are the years that, for anybody working on domestic AIDS issues, were defined by rollback in funding and a change in focus and the introduction and hitting us over the head with abstinence-based education, even for adults. This was a time when we all had to put disclaimers on our website that said the content on this website may be objectionable, not be suitable for all audiences. We were offended by that. Every one of the service providers were offended by that. We have I'm sorry if you're offended by potentially life-saving information on here, Sorry if that offends you. But, because we were talking about, gay men and sex, like it was, deemed that we had to put these disclaimers on our website. If we received these dollars, we had to do it. And so that was really deep for us, and it was a way where it was this feeling like that our hands were tied, In the end, it didn't impact our delivery of services. But for many organizations who were really just struggling, I think that, that it did change the way we deliver services in the city. There was also an intense scrutiny on prevention, and GALAEI is primarily a prevention organization. There was an article that had come out that really was very critical of prevention efforts, basically saying that prevention is not effective because we continue to see new infections, which is about as wacky to me as saying that cancer treatment is not effective because people continue to get cancer. That's BS, it's just like it doesn't, so that anybody who's working in prevention, we kind of knew, you have to constantly, I think, be able to reinvent yourself because your funding may not be there. So we just come through one of those allocations and we did really well. And we were going to get to grow. I'm always happy when we survived, like that was my threshold. But this was one of those where we got to grow, right? And so we lived, and we were going to thrive. And so we were going to be able to start a HIV testing program. So we had been an off-site testing program of Mazzoni Center, so they would come in and deliver the service. But we wanted to be able to do it ourselves, so that we didn't have to deal with their scheduling, and we were able to do it any time, not just on certain times. So we saw it as a capacity building thing. We needed to be able to do it. So this health department finally recognized our expertise, in being able to deliver, provide this service, and so we got a grant to do that. That was one of the areas that we grew, and everything else was sustained as well. And so I was really excited. I remember talking to one of my friends, who was actually Casey Cook, who had been the director of Prevention Point when we started TIP, and she had recently moved over to Bread and Roses Community Fund, where she's the ED now. And I was like, oh, Casey, we survived. And she knew, like I was talking with somebody who knew what it was like to go through this. We survived, we get to start some youth program, this testing program, I'm so excited, la la la. And she's like, that's great, you should leave. Mayor Nutter had just been elected, and there was definitely some lobbying going on right there. He had committed during the campaign trail to maintain point person on LGBT issues. Mayor Street was the first mayor to have a point person on LGBT issues, and he did so kind of out of a lot of pressure in the community. He was not great on our issues when he became mayor, Mayor Street. He didn't have a good relationship necessarily with us. He had tried to block the domestic partner legislation bill, right? That was Mayor Nutter's bill, and they were both council people at the time. Mayor Nutter, it was his bill. Then Council President Street tried to oppose it, and in many ways, I think he was opposing it. The church was really against it, and he was getting ready to run for mayor. And he definitely needed the Black church to back him up, and so I think that was they were kind of arch rivals in comic book terms. Those two, right? Mayor Nutter and Mayor Street. They were both councilmen at the time, and but so when Street became mayor, the community was kind of like, okay, what are you going to do for us because we don't like what you've done? And so, he had a network of LGBT community folks who were advisors, and they worked with him to create this role of a point person. So Michael Henson was the first point person under the street administration. He worked the entire street administration, and really he was based over in the managing director's office, and so he worked a lot on city services, right, improving access to city services, which is still probably the majority of the work I do is around our own city service, helping us get on point with our beliefs, helping our actions match our beliefs as a city. And so he worked on that, and he came from the community level. And when Mayor Nutter came on, it was definitely cleaning of house that happened. Mayor Nutter had a longer relationship with the community, the LGBT community, and was starting at a different place than Mayor Street started. Mm-hmm. Mayor Street, when he left, was in a totally different place than when he started, too. But there was really no love for him when Mayor Street started. So a lot of times people think it's a level of work that it isn't, right? It really is about also taking the call from a staff member in, the streets department, right? We get called. I'm a point person, an internal point person on HR around LGBT issues. Somebody's having a problem in the workplace. I don't advocate for them. I work with them to advocate for themselves and point out to them what they have to do, but definitely give them tips on ways of communication that would help them if they need to make a claim at some point, right? So, just a lot of just listening. There's a lot there, and then looking at the areas that we haven't touched, right? So right now, one of the things I'm working on is the seniors project, mm-hmm. right? So obviously Wayne Way's been working on seniors issues for some time. A couple other folks have been a little bit. But the city obviously is going to play a big role there because mm-hmm. it's going to mean that we are going to have to allocate resources, right? Across the board, I think the biggest need is that we don't have accurate, reflective data mm-hmm. on us in any department. We don't ask the questions, so we don't know. So when I come in, anything that we're going to do here is going to be evidence-based. It's going to be because we know it to be true, because we can count it, right? We've seen it, we've measured it. If we don't have the data to begin with, but we can't make the case for anything else. So that's why things like the census are like a big effort for us. We need to know how many people there are so that we can make a claim. If we're able to say, there's 9% of the city said that they were same-sex households, it won't be that high. Then we should be able to advocate for more workforce development dollars or dedicated dollars around community investment. Those census numbers, what seems like we should be counted, becomes a very real dollars and cents thing for our communities. Yeah. So just the data pieces, those are things that don't really take money to add questions on our forms, right? We are the biggest provider of services to people in the city, right? So if we're not asking the question, if we're not looking at the things, then we really can't make the case, We can't quantify when people are having a hard time, right? Somebody is being discriminated against. We know we've got 5 cases, right? But is that 5 people out of 3,000 that had a bad time? Mm-hmm. Or is this is 5 people out of 5 people that we've served mm-hmm. that are having a bad time? That's every person we've served, mm-hmm. right? That's a different situation. So we need to be able to quantify. And so that's some of the things. It's hard to get excited about that stuff. It's hard to say that's going to make all the difference. I see my work as playing a part in sort of much broader things. This is a truly scary time. I didn't know how this was going to shake out. I didn't know a lot about my treatment. I didn't know the difference between an oncologist and a breast surgeon when I was first diagnosed. I didn't know. Yeah. Like most people wouldn't necessarily know unless they've had to navigate this stuff. But, eventually kind of settled into the rhythm. Other people see me more than I see myself. So that was something that helped. I feel the same. I tolerated the medication pretty well. So that was not as intense as it could have been. There were a few times where there would be events And then I looked in the gay news, and there was this one time in particular, an event, and I was like, oh, good, they were there. That event made the cover, you know. I was like, oh, that's cool, you know. I don't remember what the event was, but I was like, oh, I was there, you know. I was like thinking, looking at the thing, and then I read there's a photo and a caption, and then I realized that it's a picture of me. I was like not recognizable to myself. A lot of men didn't get it. They thought it was like my new dyed butch haircut for spring. Women got it more. I think it's pretty obvious to a woman, more likely to notice that, okay, the eyebrows are gone too, the eyelashes are gone too, the skin color's off. You know, so that was different. I had a lot of really great conversations with people during that time. A lot of our elder gay men who know that women took care of gay men in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, who just shared their thoughts about that, what that meant, the role of women as caretakers to them, and maybe men need to step up for women. Do we even think about men needing to step up for women? Those were really valuable conversations to me. Right? Those are conversations we wouldn't have had. You know, those are certainly things that I know to be true, that there were lots of women in the early days of the AIDS epidemic who were taking care of their friends and loved ones, and that who then carried on the legacy of AIDS activism, and organizing, and running these agencies. Many of the first generation EDs were men, and all of the second generation EDs are women. You know, I definitely had men reach out to me in support that I wasn't expecting to, like not necessarily my closest friends, but people who got it. And so that's been very meaningful to me.